Members of BC's Jewish community say they are feeling fear after a former Hamas leader called for worldwide protests today to fight against Israel. But as the war between Israel and Hamas continues, local leaders are calling for peace. Our Joe Ballard joins us live near the commercial Broadway SkyTrain station, where some people have gathered tonight. Joel, you've been there for the past little while. What can you tell us?
Dan, there are hundreds of people here, I would say around 300, for a pro-Palestinian rally. And it started in front of the SkyTrain station, but it's now folded into the streets, blocking commercial. I know the march is going to be heading up to First Avenue. You can see it behind me. I'm sure you can hear it behind me. And all this comes, as you mentioned, as the war continues between Israel and Hamas. We're seeing huge casualties, and leaders here, as you mentioned earlier, are calling for peace. At the Congregation Beth Israel Synagogue, a sense of unease.
The number one word to describe today is fear.
Rabbi Infeld says he has heard from congregants who are afraid to come to the synagogue, his time spent consoling and comforting members.
The very point of a terrorist is not just to kill and to maim, but the very point of a terrorist is to bring terror and to terrify, and we cannot give in to terrorism.
Across town at the Al Jamia Mosque, a prayer for peace was held to spread a message of love.
Our Jewish brothers and sisters, they're feeling rage, they're feeling hate, they're feeling pain. We understand it. We as Muslims, we feel rage, we feel pain, we feel hate, and those emotions are there, but they won't get you anywhere.
In Israel, the military warned Palestinians to flee parts of Gaza as infantry and tanks carried out raids. Gaza authorities say more than 1,800 people have been killed in the conflict, while Israel's military says more than 1,300 people have been killed in their country. Back in Vancouver, the call for peace rings out amid the carnage.
What happened in Israel to the Israeli people is horrible. There is no excuse for it. I categorically condemn it, but you cannot put collective punishment on a people, and that's what's happening.
Vancouver's mayor urging understanding.
Make no mistake about it, Vancouver is a place of peace, love, and inclusion.
Some people calling on him to do more.
Are you going to condemn Israel, though?
We're not, look.
It's been 75 years, please.
Yeah, so look, I'm not going to get into that.
Our time is limited, and our prayers are going to start.
Back at the synagogue, Rabbi Infeld says emotions are complicated. Fear layered on top of mourning for those who have been killed.
That's true grief. And with that type of grief, there's nothing that can be said.
Vancouver police, meanwhile, are making themselves more visible at places of worship and community centers.
So right now, there's nothing that leads us to believe that there's any threats here in Vancouver. But having said that, we're taking extra precautions.
One piece of comfort for people in fear. Joel Ballard. So Dan, as you heard there, the plea is for peace. And I had a chance to speak with a rallier here who echoed those pleas.
Here to let the people, let the world know that it's a very bad situation over there. Please help the people and please stop the war and please find a peaceful solution for this issue to be solved forever.
Chatting with the ralliers here, they're in support of Palestinians and they're calling for the creation of a free and independent Palestinian state. Dan?
Joel Ballard live on Commercial Drive. Joel, thank you very much. A mass exodus of Palestinians from northern Gaza is now underway. They're making their way south after the Israeli army told nearly 1 million people to leave within the next 24 hours. Hamas continued to fire rockets at several Israeli cities, dismissing talk of an Israeli ground invasion as a ploy and telling people there to stay put. Israel, meanwhile, pounded Gaza with retaliatory airstrikes again today after the deadly attack by Hamas on Israel last Saturday that killed more than 1,300 people in Israel. Authorities in Gaza say the number of people killed there has climbed to 1,800, and more than 400,000 people who live in Gaza have now been forced from their homes. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is worsening under a total Israeli siege. There is no electricity, no food, fuel, and medical supplies are in short supply. While talks about opening a humanitarian corridor into Egypt are ongoing, thousands of Palestinian workers from Gaza who normally work in Israel have no idea when they will return home. As Chris Brown reports, many have gathered in cities like Ramallah in the occupied West Bank.
We're in Ramallah on the occupied West Bank, and this is a recreation center, but the people who are here, they're certainly not here for recreation. When the Hamas gunmen stormed into southern Israel and committed their massacres, there were at the time thousands of Gazan workers who were legally in Israel. Most of them were working, but some people were visiting, and there were some people even in Israeli hospitals. And now all of these people are trapped, and this is where hundreds of them literally have been put. This is a recreation center, and as you can see, people are using a basketball apparatus to dry their clothes. They're sleeping on outdoor mattresses. They're trying to exist off donations that people from the West Bank have given them. But it really is a very sorry scene, because a lot of these men, it's all men who are here, they're extremely worried about what they're seeing on television involving their families. We talked to one man who has 9 children. He's barely been able to reach his wife. He says he broke into tears because he's so concerned that they're going to be killed by this relentless bombing campaign. However, at the same time, if you ask them how they feel about what Hamas did, that is not where they direct their anger. They instead bring up the fact that these people, these young men, were living under occupation, and one man described it as a fireball that was released into Israel. But their hope here, their futures here are very dim. The borders are obviously closed. Nothing is coming in or out of Gaza. And so for everyone here, they have no idea when they're going to get home. This is a place without a future. Chris Brown, CBC News in Ramallah.
As Israel warns civilians in northern Gaza to leave, Ottawa says it is trying to make plans to get Canadians out of the region as well. But as Rafi Boudjikanian shows us, it will depend on the goodwill of both the Egyptian and Israeli governments.
As some Canadians escaping Israel got some respite arriving in Athens,
we just came to visit our grandfather. And it just suddenly everything collapsed.
Ottawa's focus sharpened on Gaza, with Israel warning more than 1 million civilians in the north they had a day to flee.
We're looking at about 150 individuals total in Gaza right now who have identified themselves as requiring assistance. The majority of these people are Canadians.
But getting them out will be complicated. Word today of a possible 5-hour window on Saturday for Egypt on Gaza's south to open up its border.
We are actively engaging with Egyptian and Israeli authorities to ensure that Canadians, permanent residents, and their family members will be able to leave.
Some of that diplomatic work by Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly in a quick head-to-head with her Israeli counterpart. But Canadian officials don't have any reassurances this safe passage will happen.
The last thing we want is Canadians getting stuck at a border. There are a number of security challenges at all the borders into Gaza. We know that there have been bombs at both borders in the last week.
One challenge is just the ability to speak to those on the ground, including this Canadian family.
There's no internet connection, nothing. We had to take chances to call internationally. I tried, my brother tried, we kept trying till we got a network or something to get in touch with them. Just my mom answered, said, we're in Rafah, we're fine, we need to go. That's the last thing we heard from them. Every minute passing without them out, this is a minute that this is a possibility for them to be killed anytime, any second.
The number of people asking for help in Gaza grows by the day. The government says the word to get out may come at the last moment as worry of further military strikes looms ahead. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is pushing ahead on his diplomatic mission. Washington says he is working to prevent a wider conflict in the Middle East. And as Katie Nicholson reports, today's meetings included talks with Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas and Jordan's King Abdullah.
Another touchdown in a whirlwind tour of the Middle East to prevent this conflict from spilling over.
Mr. Secretary, how are you?
Secretary of State Antony Blinken visiting Jordan, where he met with Mahmoud Abbas, president of the Palestinian Authority.
Thank you, press.
Abbas seizing the moment to emphasize his complete rejection of Israel's plan to displace nearly 1 million people ahead of an expected ground invasion of northern Gaza, where it believes Hamas is deeply embedded.
Good to see you. Very good to be here.
Then it was onward to Qatar to discuss the difficulties of getting humanitarian aid into Gaza and to reaffirm shared goals.
We're also working intensively together to secure the release of hostages, including American citizens being held by Hamas in Gaza. I'm grateful for the urgency that Qatar is bringing to this effort.
As Blinken departs for Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt, the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on the ground in Israel, there to assess the country's military needs. He expressed unwavering, ironclad solidarity with Israel.
There is never any justification for terrorism. And that's especially true after this rampage by Hamas.
Getting timely and sustained American help for this crisis may prove a challenge. While Blinken and Austin are trying to project strength and stability in the Middle East, in Washington, the House is still in disarray. Last night, the GOP's nominee for Speaker, Steve Scalise, bowed out with no clear frontrunner. Some in Congress frustrated by how this makes the U.S. look on the international stage in a time of crisis.
Any differences we have in this room may seem big in the room, but in the context of China on the march, Russia on the march, terrorism on the march, because they smell weakness in Washington, those differences are infinitesimal.
Crucially, without a speaker and a functioning House, it will be more difficult for the U.S. to pass any kind of meaningful spending bill, not just for Israel, but Ukraine, and soon its own federal government. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Toronto.